4 years and a lesser income ago, my family of then two moved out of our dinky apartment and decided to rent a house. We found one for rent by a rather immense church that was across the street from the hospital my wife worked at. Thinking of our wee one that was only a few months old, this meant she could nurse easily. We did have a couple of misgivings about this house, like the gaping crawl spaces in the basement that were creepy as hell to get out and entire room infested with spiders and bugs thanks to another crawl space. However, we sealed the holes with reflective insulation, sprayed the heck out of it for bugs, and avoided the basement unless doing laundry. It was our first experience having space for our kids, a real dining room and living room, so we were excited. I worked nights and my wife worked days, so I took care of the kids during the day and worked until midnight. One night, while I was working my data entry crap, my wife called me in a panic saying that the doorbell had gone off. Now this was an old doorbell that actually rang bells to play a charming little tune. I quirked an eyebrow and made a joke, but then she said it wasn't the same tune. It was something discordant. Around this time, my oldest started getting scared at night. I pawned it off as faulty old wiring and thought little of it. One day, playing with my older son and watching my little one shake the crap out of his toys, I got to hear it. The entity caused, or not, it may have been a cold chill down my spine. I shook it off, but when I saw the shadow of someone walking upstairs at the corner of my eye, I froze and immediately thought, it's my poor eyesight or maybe a floater in my eye that I caught. Then, my oldest, then 3, says, "Was that Mama?" That was it. Time for a walk. Get the wagon, hope your diapers are clean. I might need a diaper too. Let's go outside in the happy sunshine. I'll try not to run or whatever, but we're going now. The bell did not stop. After that, it would ring with the same discordant tune in the dead of night. We made jokes on how it seemed vaguely similar to parts of the Oscar Mayer Wiener song. We were poor and we couldn't afford to move. We ended up having to move regardless. The church decided to sell it without letting us know, and we had to get out. Luckily, we ended up finding an apartment opening at the nice place next door to a wacko who was massing with guns and explosives. The funny part is that we moved into the first place to get away from wackos. What do you think? I've had many paranormal experiences, but this one was the first, and it will be something that I will never forget. Before I tell the story, many of you will have different reactions, and that is your right. But what I'm about to tell you really happened to me. I remember that it was during the summer, and I was about 9 years old. My mom wanted me to go to summer school, which I hated. I didn't want to waste my summer in school. But what could I do? The elementary school I had to go to was not far from where I lived, which was not much to complain about. While going to this school, I heard rumors that the school was haunted, especially one of the girls' restrooms that was in the very creepy hallway and far from the classrooms. Sadly, during summer, that restroom was the only one opened. Usually, I would go there during recess and lunch when there were many girls. However, whenever classes were in session, and it seemed that no girl wanted to step in that bathroom. Whenever I walked in the hallway, I would notice that 2 groups of 3 girls would enter the restroom together, and one would just go to the restroom while the other stood as they were keeping watch. There were times when I walked into the restroom, while the other stood there, and I just couldn't figure it out. There were random girls that I never knew of, sometimes just in the hall around that bathroom. They would ask me if I could go to that bathroom with them, and when I asked why, they told me they were too scared to go in there alone. I once asked the girls about what was so scary about that particular restroom. One of the girls told me that there was a girl that died in that restroom and now she haunts it. Girls who entered the restroom alone would see her. I don't know how this girl died or what, but I didn't bother to ask because I'd never really thought too much of it. Also, I thought all the girls were crazy and made up the stories, but I soon learned that this was not the case. It was a Thursday morning, and my teacher told me to take the attendance sheets to the office, which I did. As I was walking back to class, I felt nature was calling and I had to go to the restroom. I walked everywhere to see if there were restrooms that were open, and to my luck, the haunted restroom was the only one that was open for the girls. I remembered all the stories about it. I looked around if there was another student that was nearby, and there wasn't. I stood in the front, and then I called out to anyone. Hello? Only my echoes were heard. As I stepped closer and closer to the restroom, I felt a chill in my spine. My heart was beating loudly and rapidly. I felt scared, terrified. I didn't want to go in, but I really had to go, and I didn't want to wet myself. I gathered my courage and went inside, alone. The bathroom was old. There was writing on the walls and mirrors. Trash was everywhere, and some of the door locks of cubicles, or would have been broken, were not even there. You could just see through their holes through the door. I immediately went in and closed the door. The chill of fear never left me. As I was doing my business, I heard footsteps and I called out to see if it was another girl. Hello? Is anyone there? I got no response. My nervousness intensified and I looked down to the door to take a peek. I saw legs of what belonged to a girl, I think. I saw that she wore white shocks, worn out black shoes, and her skin was pale, and I mean deathly pale. Something that looked out of the ordinary. I felt my nervousness turn into fear and I dared not to look further. When I finished using the toilet, I could not get out of the cubicle. My gut feeling told me not to get out. I felt that she was still there, waiting for me. I called out to her again, hoping for a response. Hello? Are you there? Still no response. Slowly, I looked down to see if she was in the same spot that she stood, and she wasn't. I saw her feet, but this time they were in front of the cubicle that I was in, and I felt that I was going to have a heart attack at any moment. Never in my life have I felt this much fear, or wants to cry. I told the unknown girl, "Please, leave me alone." I still received no response, and I could see that the feet were still from afar. To my luck, the bell rang and it was recess time. A lot of girls entered the bathroom. I was still in the cubicle as the fear overwhelmed me. Slowly, I got out, and once I did, the girls looked at me and noticed my scared form. I asked them, "Did you see the girl when she came in?" Many of the girls asked me if I was okay. I told her what happened, and I kid you not, all the girls in the bathroom were silent. No one said or did a thing. They all told me they believed me and told me I was crazy for coming into the restroom alone. But I admired my courage. When the teacher asked me what happened to me, I lied and said I felt sick and went to puke at the restroom, but felt better. I was a good student back then and the teacher believed me. Ever since then, I never went inside that restroom. Luckily, the janitor opened the other girl's restroom because of the complaints that the parents made about their kids not making it to the restroom. I will never forget my experience. I don't know if it was an actual ghost or a girl trying to play a prank. It makes me wonder if students, specifically female students, experience the same thing as I did when I was a child.
I'm an 18-year-old female. I've been stalked quite a few times in my life, but thankfully, most of the perpetrators were annoying rather than scary. These two individuals never got to bloom into full stalkers due to the fact they moved out of state. They were easily the creepiest individuals I'd ever met. I'd begun to attend a community college, and in an effort to make friends, joined an anime club. Once a month, we scraped together enough money for pizza and soda, reserve a room in the library, and spend the day watching everyone's favorites. Everything was great until the second meeting. We watched Princess Mononoke and Kiki's Delivery Service and some other similar movies. Then, Chad put in the last movie of the day. It was animated softcore porn. None of us knew what to do. We were all kind of socially awkward. He sat through our movies quietly and politely, we were supposed to do the same. We spent the hour and 20 minutes red-faced and casting at each other horrified looks, while Chad watched the porn with rapt attention. Finally, it was over and he turned around. "What did you guys think?" he asked. He was looking directly at me. That was the first time I noticed that I was the only female in anime club. Trying to be polite, I made a huge mistake. It was, interesting? I meant it to convey his choice was interesting, considering that we'd all brought in Disney movies, but he took it to mean I was fascinated with creepy porn. From that day on, he showed up everywhere I went on campus. The second I entered any sort of common room, there he was with his laptop, trying to show me anime porn, seating himself way, way too close to me so he could lean in and try to watch it with me. Each time I would tell him, "I don't really like this show," as politely as I could, and move to another table, but he would move right back uncomfortably close to me and assure me that I would get into the story if I just watched. One day, he sat down next to me with his laptop and I heaved a sigh of relief. He pulls out a notebook and shows me a drawing. It was really creepy. It looked like a robot uterus. Hoping I'm wrong, I asked what it is. It's a creepy robot uterus. He's writing a book about an AI sex toy that invades lady parts and turns them into ravening sex fiends willing to do anything for the D. He wants my opinion on his story. I told him it wasn't really my kind of story and tried to move again. He followed and began asking me really inappropriate questions in the name of research. Thankfully, at this point, Vincent, the boy who'd brought me into anime club, noticed that Chad was following me table by table through the lunchroom as I turned even redder with embarrassment and came over. Chad fled before he could even speak. Chad was afraid of Vincent. Oh, thank God. Vincent was awesome and always in the lunchroom. I could just hang out near his anti-Chad force field. Vincent played World of Darkness with his friends in the lunchroom, and I had played all through high school. By proximity, I was eventually asked to join the game. I met with the storyteller, Paul, and gave him my character sheet. He informed me that I could keep whatever stats I had, but I was going to be taking over the role of Jenny, a long-standing NPC. I asked who Jenny was, but was only told I would get a huge kick out of it. So I attended, waiting for him to introduce me to the team. They were playing the game in a seedy strip club setting. Everyone looked bored but Paul and a player named Bill, who were wrapped up in the ordering of a pen and paper hooker. I didn't know Bill, but he was huge and creepy, with an intense, unblinking stare that was always focused either on Paul or me. I start to get a bad feeling. Then Paul announces Jenny, the hooker, has arrived to serve as Bill's character. He turns to me and grins lewdly. Bill's searing focus locks onto me. "I'm not playing a hooker," I yell. Paul looks crestfallen. Bill looks enraged. "Dude, just let her play the bartender." Vincent sighs when Paul begins pressuring me. Paul eventually relents, sulking. I finished that game and showed up for one more, but Paul insisted on sexualizing my character, and Bill just sat there across from me, both games breathing heavily and glaring. I quit the game. Bill started following me, and he never spoke to me, just sat across the room from me, glaring and snorting, with Chad. They were friends, of course they were. I had to abandon the cafeteria entirely, because while Chad was creepy, I was pretty sure Bill was dangerous, and he wasn't afraid of Vincent. Also, it really looked like Chad was encouraging him to do something while they stared at me whispering. I left the state at the end of the semester, but kept in touch with Vincent. About 7 years later, I married him. When I brought up all the crazy things that happened back when we met, he told me that actually everyone was afraid of Bill, particularly Paul. They tried to disband the game because all Bill wanted to do was rent fake hookers, but he made veiled threats that he might do something insane if they stopped playing with him. This day, I think Paul was offering me to Bill the same way you offer a crazy guy at the office a Snickers, just in the chance that if he does do something drastic, he won't do it to you. We are Catholic, and in the town I lived, there was a Catholic church that kept its doors open 24 hours a day, so people could go pray. A little after 2:15 a.m., we were walking and decided to go in. We entered the church through the front and made our way to the stairs facing the altar. We knelt on the stairs and began praying. After about 5 minutes, I heard the side door to my right slam shut. In a quiet church at 2:30 a.m., that is super loud. We both spun in that direction and saw nothing. Before we could speak, the distinct sound of running footsteps emanated from the front of the side door, then made their way towards the front entrance behind us. It was so quiet, otherwise we could follow the sound with our eyes. The footstep ran past the front entrance. If they were human, it would have to be on their left, to the stairs that lay to our right as we faced the front. They ascended the stairs, and all sound ceased. We looked right at each other, dumbfounded and unsure of what to say. Suddenly, the church bells began to ring, and I instinctively looked over to my watch. It was 2:30. Breaking our silence, I remarked that they must have always rang at 2:30 and I never noticed it before. We sat there for maybe 90 seconds, discussing what had happened, when suddenly 2 police officers walked into the church. The police station is 2 buildings from the church. Well, the officers asked if we had rung the bells. No, I replied. We were praying. If we had, we wouldn't have had time to make it back to the altar before you got here. He realized that was true, and the 2 officers walked up to the stairs and then climbed back down. My girlfriend and I sat there waiting for them. Maybe after about 2 minutes, they came back down and announced that not only had they not seen anyone, but the door leading to the bells was padlocked from the outside. Did you guys see anyone? The same officer asked. These bells never ring at 2:30. We both replied that we hadn't, and I wasn't going to mention ghostly footsteps, and they thanked us and told us to be careful, and left. Till this day, I have no idea what we heard, but we both remember it happening to this day. What do you guys think?
This happened to me back in 2011 when I was 19. I live in Sydney, Australia, and this happened on a country back road on the outskirts of the city at a place called Picton. Myself and 4 of my high school buddies decided to go for a drive with no particular destination in mind. We jumped on the highway at about 8 p.m. It was summer, so the sun was beginning to set. We took an exit off the highway and began driving down a few rural roads. Being that we had no destination in mind, and that we were more focused on the music blasting out of the speakers, we eventually got lost. There was a full moon that night, and there wasn't a cloud in the sky. After a while, we saw a car pull out from the side road about 100 meters in front of us. From the height of its red tail lights, it looked to be a sedan. Being lost, we decided to follow the car. We did have signal on our phones and could have easily charted a route on Google Maps, but decided against it to see if we could find a way back by following this car. I know, dumb. We maintained the 100-meter gap between us and the car and followed at 80 kilometers per hour. We eventually came to a long, straight dirt road with large treeless fields on both sides. We then saw the car's taillights make a left turn up ahead, and we thought finally, we can get off this straight stretch of road. This is when things get very creepy. We arrived to the turn about 10 seconds after the car turned off, but there was no turn off, just a dead end. There was an old rusty metal gate that was clearly locked with an equally rusty chain and padlock leading to an overgrown driveway with no clear tire tracks. There was no way in how that the driver could have unlocked the gate and driven down the driveway in 10 seconds it took us to reach it. Even if they did, we would have seen the headlights and tail lights going down the driveway regardless. And if for some reason they decided to switch them off, we would still have seen the car as the terrain was very flat and it was a full moon. We all confirmed that we saw something. To this day, I still can't explain what happened. Did the car somehow evade our vision, or was a lost soul returning to their earthly home after a tragic event? I'll never know. Even today, a few years later, all of my friends and myself remember this.
In the early 2000s, I lived in South Minneapolis, Minnesota. It was a little bit of a rough neighborhood, and still is, but in comparison, it's not the worst part of the city. During that time, I was living in a very old house my family called the South House, due to being in the southern part of the city. It's probably 100 years old or so. I don't remember exactly when it was made. Despite its age, it's quite a decent-looking little home that sits on the corner of an intersection. But I had a strange feeling about this house before I even moved in. While it was still for sale, I used to keep driving over to it and parking on the street directly across from the house. I would just sit there and stare at it with a weird feeling, thinking that this house is not normal. I eventually set aside my strange feeling of the place and bought it. I moved in with my dog named Magnum. He was a brindle-colored pit bull, and he was the most fearless dog I had ever seen. He scared the shit out of people and other dogs. He definitely kept me safe in this old house, which is all I could afford at the time. But perhaps I should have picked a different place to live because strange things began to happen. I remember one day, I looked out my front window to see an old man standing on the other side of the street, looking as if he was going to cross it. He had long black and gray hair, and he was wearing some kind of old-style clothing, definitely not modern. After a few seconds, when I had blinked, the old man was gone. That wasn't the last of him, though. Time and time again, I heard cars swarming around, horns honking, and even accidents outside. During those incidents, I had asked people what had happened, and they swore they saw an old man walk into the middle of the street without even looking. Every single time this happened, the old man was never found. I can imagine that the police are getting tired of this story. Who would believe that some guy kept disappearing? I remember other times, I started hearing a commotion from upstairs. It sounded like people were running around up there. But every time I checked, there was never anyone up there. But it got stranger than that. Normally, I would keep all the upstairs rooms closed, except for the one and only bathroom in the place, which I would also leave the light on for whenever I had to make my way to the bathroom during the night. But one morning, I went to use the bathroom and the light was off. Also, the master bedroom down the hallway was wide open. I wasn't sure how that happened, but it wasn't the only time that it did. Every night after that, I would turn on the bathroom light, which had a stiff switch, one that you really had to snap to turn off. I also made sure that the master bedroom door was closed by rattling it. Then I would go to bed. Every morning it was the same. The bathroom light would be off, and the master door would be wide open. It was so strange. After that, I figured there might be a spirit in the home. Maybe a few, or maybe someone was sneaking into my house at night. So, I was on high alert after that. At this point, people would have called the police or gotten the hell out of there. But I didn't. I stuck around since I didn't know for sure if there was a ghost or not. But things only got worse. One day, I came home from my security job to find my dog Magnum looking very shaken and scared for some reason. I really wasn't sure why, because he was always fearless. Honestly, I really wasn't scared of the noises that I heard upstairs before or anything like that. So Magnum knew something that I did not, and it was really scaring him. Why? Oh man, did I find out what it was, and it scared the living daylights out of me. What happened was that I heard loud footsteps upstairs. It wasn't the same running footsteps I heard before. These were very loud, heavy footsteps, and I thought someone broke into my house by climbing up the second-story window. I then heard the footsteps slowly but loudly start making their way downstairs, coming from what sounded like a big guy wearing heavy boots. I quickly grabbed my revolver and stood behind a makeshift curtain that I had hung in the doorway to separate the living room from the hall, which had the stairs on the other side. A few feet from the doorway, I waited as the footsteps made their way down the stairs, and I was going to present myself with a gun as soon as this person stepped onto the creaky step at the bottom of the stairs. Once I heard the creak, I whipped back the curtain, expecting some big guy to be there with a gun in his face. And at that moment, my heart sank, because there was no one there. I let go of the curtain, letting it close. Do you know that feeling of sudden fear when your heart sinks into your stomach? It's like an oh crap feeling when your body is shaking, your heart is pounding, your hair is standing up, and you can almost feel the fear running through your veins. It's the feeling you get when you know something is wrong. It's horribly wrong. Even after that day, I didn't move out. I was still living in that terrifying home, and that situation at the stairs was not the end of it. I remember another time a picture floated off the wall almost to my face before falling to the floor. Another time, where the mouse trap in the pantry snapped and there was a loud crash in the kitchen where I found the stove had been moved well out of place. Also, almost hitting the gas line in the wall behind it. I checked the pantry to look at the mouse trap, but it was gone. I searched the pantry and the kitchen up and down, all over, but I couldn't find it. I still to this day have never seen that mousetrap again. Did the ghost take it? Did it snap on him and make him angry enough to smash my stove? That must have been one hell of a strong ghost. More like a poltergeist if he could do that. I wonder what it could have done if it could move my stove that way. So, eventually came the time where I had enough. I made sure every light in the house was off and I waited until night. Once darkness consumed every room, I grabbed my Bible and my cross. I then proceeded to loudly recite Hail Mary prayers and then saying, "The power of God commands you, and you are dead. Go to the light." Out loud through every room on both floors, including the basement. After I performed an exorcism on the entire house, that was the last of the problems I had with the ghost. I never heard a peep ever again. I eventually allowed my 4-year-old nephew to visit me and see Magnum for the first and last time. Unfortunately, Magnum passed away, and so I was there alone until I got a new dog that was nicer by nature. I have lived in the South house for a few years before selling it to my brother and moving out. He let her mother move into it, who lived there for a few years with several cats and dogs until the house burned in a fire. She made it out safely, but unfortunately never pets did. Even after the fire, the house was still standing, and so my brother remodeled the entire house and eventually sold it. The South house was very extraordinary, nothing like I'd ever seen before. It has a long story behind it. It has been through a lot over the years, and as far as I know, after getting rid of the ghost there, the South house has been peaceful ever since.
This happened to me in college when I lived with my roommate, Michelle. It was our freshman year, and our dorm building had 4 different wings, and 2 were boys and 2 were girls. Our wing was connected by a door down the hall, which led to a boys' wing. All floors in each wing were the same sex, and boys only had access to the girls' wings through the connecting door, which you had to have a key card for. They were locked at all times, and the key cards only worked for that door. I had known Michelle for a long time, and we loved the girls on our floor. We would all hang out off it, and during the week and sometimes weekends, whoever would be home would leave their door open so we could stop in, hang out, and whatever. We never had a problem, and sometimes guys would take shortcuts to their wing from campus through our floor. No big deal. We get to know the guys who did this off it. Most often they all said hey if our doors were open and continued on their way. One day, our friend April got quiet when there were about 6 of us in our room, and I noticed. I asked her what was the matter, and she said, "Dude, do you not see that guy that walked by? I seen him before. He's so fucking creepy, and he never says anything. He just stares at us." We all looked at each other and said no. She shrugged and said if he came by again, she would let us know. About an hour later, after watching some reality show, she hits Michelle in the arm. We all look up, and there is a tall guy with longer hair, wearing all black, walking slowly by. He says nothing and just stares at us, but looks away when we all look up. He leaves and we all look at each other. We chalk it up to him being lost, we haven't seen him before, and resume watching TV. I talked to Michelle later that night though, and we agreed to keep a lookout and let the rest of the girls know to do the same just in case. We begin to see this guy on the floor all the time, sometimes multiple times a day. It began to get ridiculous when we would all be changing and getting ready to go out, and he would walk by 3 to 4 times. doing nothing but staring and walking slower than necessary. Once, he walked by 6 times and we moved on to the room to shut the doors. He clearly lived in the building because his keycard worked on the locked door and he would be there daily. We began feeling uncomfortable leaving our doors open, even when there were multiple people home, and doing so. We asked the guys we knew that across the hall on our floor if he lived there. They said no, he didn't, and they actually got concerned when he told us that, because we didn't know what was going on. One of the RAs on one of the guys' floors said if it continued or got weirder, to talk to our RA. He offered to try to find out where this dude lived for us. I'd like to say it didn't get weirder, but it did. One day, I went to our dorm computer room to print off some notes for a psych class and prep a project I was going to turn in for the end of the week. Creepy bro sits next to me and starts surfing the net as I'm sitting down to do my thing on the computer. I felt ice cold. Everyone had laptops before tablets were a thing, and it felt odd he arrived almost the exact same time. I printed my shit off and left quickly. I head to my psych class, and as I get to the psych building and walk to my class, I notice he followed me. I was stressed out the entire class and left from a different exit in the lecture hall. He was still milling around as I left, and hoped to God they didn't see me as I practically ran home. I get back, breathless, and Michelle asks what's wrong. I tell her and she looks spooked. I go, "What?" And she shows me her Facebook. Creepy guy friended her, and his name is listed as Juan, and the photo is him in his underwear. I check mine and same fucking thing. We knock on a few girls' doors. 6 other people also got friended. We said nope to that, practically pounded our RA's door down and said what had been going on, and I told her what had just happened to me at class. One of the other girls swore he followed her as well. She panicked and he said that she blocked him online and she would take care of it. After that, we never saw him again, and we don't know what they did, but he wasn't on our floor the rest of the year, and never really found out where he lived in the building. Our RA told us later that there wasn't anyone named Juan in the entire building. So Juan, let's not ever meet again.
This story takes place almost a year ago exactly. I work at a private school in California. I'm a teaching assistant and work for our after-school care program. My coworker, who I'll call M, and I have always thought our work was haunted. Well, I always knew it was. She thought it might be. Doors would open and close on their own. We'd hear voices and footsteps. Toys would be left in strange places after we put them away for the day. We see things out of the corner of our eyes. You name it, it happened. It also didn't help that we were always the last people on campus. If anything, it just upped the creepy factor. While all these occurrences were definitely unsettling, this story was one of the most disturbing. Like I said earlier, we're pretty sure it's haunted and decided to go around the building with holy water, incense, and praying, and telling whatever spirits that were there that they need to leave. Thinking this worked, we went home. The next day, Em and I were working with pre-K. In our pre-K building, there's a loft. Em was sitting at the table right in front of the loft when one of our pre-K kids came up and sat in her lap. She had her head on Em's shoulder and told Em, "There's a little boy up there." Em looked up at the loft and saw that no one was in the loft. She called the little girl silly for trying to trick her and saying, "There's nobody up there." But the little girl was adamant. "He's right there, but you can't see him because he's hiding from you." Needless to say, Em was a bit creeped out, but told the girl, "Well, he can come down here and play when he's ready." She said okay and laid her head back on Miss M's shoulder. A minute or two goes by when A's head whips up and exclaimed, "But don't lock him in there. He doesn't want to be locked in there." Now, M is thoroughly freaked out and tells me what happened with the girl. In doing so, I make a horrifying realization. While going through the building with holy water the night before, I hadn't used the water in the loft. He had already locked it up for the night, and I just hadn't thought about it. Now, here's where we feel into that horror movie cliche. We had brought a Ouija board the previous Halloween but had never used it. It just sat in its box in the back of the car for almost a year. So like idiots, we decided to use the board. We knew using the board at school was a terrible idea, so we drove down the street to the marina. We start using the board and ask if someone is here. The spirit comes through the board saying his name is Daniel and that he's a young boy. Daniel tells us that, including himself, there are 3 spirits in our particular building: a female spirit named Maria and a bad spirit. While M believed the board, I was rather skeptical. I had been able to feel when spirits are around me ever since I was little. I had only ever felt one spirit in that building, and I knew it was bad news. But I kept that information to myself. So, Daniel tells us that he and Maria are afraid of the other spirit, and that it is very mad at me for trying to make it leave, saying that it wants to hurt me. Daniel also continuously gave us the number 5 along with a string of other numbers. We closed the session so we could figure out what those numbers meant. I had thought, what if it's a phone number? And turns out I was right. 3 of our coworkers had the same first 4 numbers of their phone numbers. For example, it was like 1234. We then returned to the board and asked if something was going to happen to our 3 coworkers. The board said yes. We asked if someone meant the harm, and again it said yes. Not much happened after that. We closed the session and went home. Upon returning to work the next day, I went up to the little girl and asked her about the boy in the loft. I asked if she knew his name or what he looked like. At first she was hesitant, but responded with, "His name is Daniel, and he has dark hair, dark eyes, and gray skin." I asked if she meant pale skin, and she said no, got up and brought me a gray marker and said, "Gray, like the marker." Needless to say, M was freaked out and walked out of the room. Then I asked the girl if there was anyone else that liked to hide up there, like Daniel does. She told me no, all the while looking around the room to make sure as Daniel wasn't nearby. I asked her if she was sure. She said yes. She also told me that Daniel scares her, that he's not very nice, and that he yelled at her for telling us about him. I cemented what M believed and I already knew. The pre-K building was definitely haunted. It also meant I was right. Daniel wasn't who he said he was. A few weeks go by. Em and I have all but forgotten about the board giving us our coworker's number. Mostly because we'd been so busy with work and life. That is until the 3 of them went on a trip with 2 of their friends. The group of 5 traveled to Route 91 Harvest Festival in Las Vegas. They were in the middle of the worst mass shooting in U.S. history. They survived and were unharmed. It didn't take long for Em and I to pull the pieces together. The shooting took place exactly 5 weeks after we used the Ouija board. Leading up to the shooting, almost all the activity had died down. As soon as our coworkers returned, so did the activity. Only now, it seemed more intense and happened more frequently, to the point where students were staring and starting to see that things were happening. So, I went through the building again, only this time I didn't use a Catholic prayer. You see, while I was born and raised Catholic, I'd had a falling out with Catholicism. As I'd mentioned before, I'd always been able to feel spirits around me, something my extremely Catholic mother did not like. Feeling ostracized for being different and a variety of other reasons, I found my way to Wicca, and I've been Wiccan ever since. So, this time I ran around the building, burning sage and performing a cleansing ritual. I also made sure to close and seal the board and any door we may have unintentionally left open. So, it seems to be working so far. I'm usually rather hesitant to tell the story just because I know it sounds crazy. And as much as I wish I was making it up, it is the truth. It was definitely one of the scariest encounters I have ever had.